Dan Sivak from People and Places. I'm just interested where the pressure tests have failed, where, I mean, I think you pointed out earlier that distribution is the challenge. Organisation of reciprocity in building communities and contribution is the key element. And as I understand it from the time banking model, the broker is fundamental to enabling that, making that work as the organiser. And I may be wrong. Where has that been open to abuse? Where has that fallen over? Or it hasn't, in your experience?
Oh, I think initially the broker is a magical sort of source of trust. But the one thing you do not want is an anal retentive broker. You want somebody who builds a small cabinet of folks. One person takes the phone calls, another person takes the birthday parties, another person takes the kids' events, another person takes the computer input. So you want very quickly to begin sort of unbundling those responsibilities. Increasingly, I think we're going to find ways in which simply the acknowledgement that I come from a time bank means that somebody whom you can trust. Now the software, we're going somewhat radical in the software. This month the open source version of it's being tested with a view toward its being multilingual and having texting capacity and being on mobile phones by the end of the year. So that we don't know. I mean, this is a journey of discovery, but we think that it's possible to rebuild sets of trusts in ways that really span distance. You put a group of time bank people together, as we do in a national conference, and they treat each other as long-lost family. They respond to each other across lines of language, race, because the assumption is that you've bought into the values. And, you know, very frankly, robbing a time bank is probably not the quickest way to get rich. And I can't tell you that everybody in time banking is an angel, but I can tell you that at least over these 25 years, I know of only one theft of one cell phone in one public housing complex, and within an hour, everybody knew which kid had done it because the community had been knit together. And so people sort of play by the rules, and they sort of say, this is family, and we'll play internally by the set of rules, and we'll honor them. And there's a real sense of joy when you see people in a time bank come to a meeting. They know they're not being judged. They know that just their presence is a gift, and there's a wonderful kind of energy that anybody who's been to time bank meetings says this just has a very special feel to it.
Sam, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that?
No, I think what we're finding is that as people pick up time banking as a tool, they add their own flavour. And I think what you've got to ask yourself really is what time banking is trying to do, and in what areas is it working, and where is it trying to what is it trying to achieve. So certainly around aspects of vulnerability, or around social care, around specific roles for brokers, there is an integral part of that role. Increasingly within a sort of co-production arena, we're seeing organisations developing time banking as part of their core funding model, and in effect working to sort of redefine some of their core staff, so that some of those roles can pick up on some of the sort of mechanics of time banking, which again is part of the sustainability. I would be very surprised if we don't, if we're as successful as we have the ambition to be. I'd be very surprised if a local neighbourhood doesn't actually reflect the diversity. So I'd be very surprised if one of the products of this is not a sort of kaleidoscope of different ways of working, because the diversity runs through this as one of the core threads, really.
Great, thank you. You had a question, and then this lady at the back as well, please. Thanks.
Hi, I'm William Wong. I run an innovation lab that deals with healthcare reforms, particularly in the area of preventative healthcare. the biggest problems we're facing in this country are of the huge complexity. A flat economy, NHS, welfare reforms, so on and so forth. In my experience, the most able, brightest people already overcommitted. And the time bank concept relies on surplus time and willingness. Where do we find the people who've got surplus time and the brains actually to make a difference?
Can I take this one?
Absolutely. I'm struggling. I need help.
I'm not going to deconstruct that, but I would like to have a go at turning it upside down. And certainly in terms of our understanding when it comes to most ableist, and our understanding of when it comes to the best of us, I certainly think we're in the game of finding new definitions. And I think there's a really strong message, or there's a really strong signal that needs to come out of this, that actually we're not just open for business to business, we're open to business to people that actually want to work in this way. So I think I accept the nature of the complexity, but without doubt where I see the most productivity, where I've experienced the most success, is actually when I've been part of a multifaceted team that actually reflects a whole range of core skills which go far beyond some of the things that we might take for value or best. I don't know if you want to.
Well, I think that there are different times in our life when we have more time or when we have more flexibility, and that I'm not assuming that the burden is always the same. But I do think a lot of the energy of the best and brightest of us goes into what I'll call wallowing with the problem rather than trying to shape solutions in ways that could be different. I'm a professor. I oversee the running of the youth court. I have grandchildren. I work a 7-day week, but I find time to give rides to people. I find time to garden because it's my way of saying to the neighborhood I care. And I think that the question becomes one, I think if you gave to people a request to say, we're not asking you just to volunteer, use all of your creativity to create a project that uses these ideas, that enlists others, and challenges them to be a catalyst rather than simply the dispenser of services or the producer of the outputs they now have, and said, we've just given you a line of credit called a new medium of exchange. How would you invest that? Help us create something. Be a designer of a new way of dealing with this problem of complexity that you've talked about. People would respond to that as a new challenge, and for them it would not be a step down, it would be in effect asking them to step up to a different level of creation. The creation of the Homecomers Academy, the creation of the youth court, the creation of new ways to engage people in different ways. If you think of a social enterprise for young people where they could video and capture the stories of the elderly, the possibilities of imagination, that money triggers innovation. Time banking can trigger the same kind of innovation and the same kind of creativity in ways that will turn on your most busy people rather than turn them off, would be my suggestion. Ask them to create with it.
I wondered if you had any thoughts on the role of time banking in health promotion, and whether the impact of co-production and time banking is on health and well-being is being evaluated rigorously.
There have been some evaluations and some studies which I'll provide you with that show a consistent impact on mental health that has been very, very powerful in terms of doctors actually finding at one place a significant and consistent reduction in medication for depression and hypertension. In other cases, we simply get a whole, I guess in Clapham there was a study of mental health and improvement in terms of dealing with anxiety, dealing with a feeling of not being valued and in fact being rejected. So acceptance makes a difference. Feeling you're valued makes a difference. And I think it's probably a more powerful medicine than what the drug pharmacists can offer. But there have been some studies. Studies are always a dog to try and get controlled experiments and so forth, but there have been some studies.
Thank you. I'm Benita Matowska from People Who Share. We're a social enterprise building a marketplace of sharing. And I'm interested to hear about whether you see time banking as being part of something even bigger, part of this notion of the sharing economy, and how you can see that being part of an economy and helping to catalyse and facilitate that economy will actually increase the popularity of time banking, and where does that sit within this sort of bigger notion of the sharing economy?
I guess my general statement is I'm excited by the work that I've seen on the collaborative and on sharing economy. The transition towns have approached me and saying they find this to be a medium of exchange that is peculiarly consistent with their own values, and they find it very useful. I think we need to talk and collaborate and dream up ways to learn from each other. I think that's a very exciting. I think the development of a sharing economy is very powerful, and it would be very exciting to try and develop some ways that were exemplary of the ways in which the two could reinforce each other. Yeah.
Thank you. And this gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the talk. Thomas Newmark from the RSA. I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of statutory agencies in this country around these type of questions, and partly because they have much less money to do what they previously did. But do you think there's a tension in that some of what you're describing, especially about being reciprocal, requires a certain degree of maybe humility with the people that you're working with, whereas if you're a statutory body and you're trying to bring in time banking to continue to do what you did before, but with a lot of volunteers, a kind of volunteerism approach, that actually maybe undermines some of the values you're talking about? Or is that contradiction just something I'm imagining?
Well, either a statutory authority is a hierarchical concept or it's a trust concept. If you are entrusted with a public obligation, then I think you start off by saying there's no way you can do it alone, there's no way you have the resources to do it, and we need each other. And so you use scarce resources as a trust that you hold to be used with fidelity to purpose in a way that makes most sense. It does not make most sense to concentrate it on those privileged with degrees if you can do a better job by enlisting a much larger group to fulfill that mission more effectively. And so I would say that there's opportunity for joint problem solving. We're dealing in some places with veterans coming back from the front. Now, they can either be kept in homes and dealt with as paralyzed, useless cripples, or they can be part of a time bank transport program for the whole community, or they can be role models for kids. So the whole question of how we begin to discharge those public responsibilities, and I would hope that this opens up new possibilities and invites new creativity.
I think it's a really interesting question about how we use time banking, particularly with local authorities and public sector organisations at this particular time. I didn't know if anyone who's actively involved in a time banking here, perhaps Tris Dyson, is he here today? Sorry, Tris, if you had a perspective on that as well.
Yes, I mean, it is a... Sorry, thanks. Yes, I think Yes, I think it is a tension, certainly. And there is more willingness on behalf of some statutory agencies than there are with others. So with some, it's sort of baby steps. I'm thinking of housing associations and local authorities that have participation agendas and want to increase volunteering. It's not radical, but get more people involved and you can start to sort of create some sort of change. But I think there is a genuine willingness from quite a surprising number of statutory agencies to show more humility and to embrace a more co-productive approach, partly because of the crisis that we're all in, but before then, I think. So.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'd just like to reinforce that. My name is David Neal. I currently work for something called Access to Rehability in North Wales, but I was an Assistant Chief Officer of the Probation Service. And I have to say that it isn't just about the crisis. There have been people in the public sector who've been trying to do this stuff for years. We ran a bakery through an intermediate labour market project. And the most humbling thing that ever happened to me, it still makes me sort of swell up, was somebody after 20 years actually saying, I've never worked before. They didn't work for money, but they worked to make bread. And the dignity that that gave that person, I mean, the recidivism, as you mentioned, the evidence is overwhelming. That if you give someone dignity, and we called them clients and not ex-offenders, you know, we deliberately tried the language. But I think, I take your point about it being a mixed bag. But I have to say that virtually everybody I dealt with went into public service to be a public servant. And a lot of them are willing, but they've been demoralised over the years. And what you need to do is flip it so that you get their morale back. You don't talk to them in terms of results or business, and you don't talk to them about them being experts. You get their morale back and you find what that little spark was as to why they went into this in the first place. And I'm with Edgar, it's about values.
Thank you.
There's a hell-raising piece as well, because I don't think we've yet worked hard enough at really pressing forward on the co-production agenda. I would see that we've got a long way to go in terms of winning the argument. And I think there is a baseline argument that actually says whatever label we attach in terms of service user or problem or whatever particular label we attach to the problem, I don't think we've yet made the case that these guys have got the solution. And co-production is a triumphant, and it needs to be starting to be seen as a triumphant of commissioner or market maker, of provider, of organisation, and then of user. And I think there is a risk as we move into this new era or we use the language that actually what happens is the market reshapes and it takes form, and as the market reshapes around the new agenda and the new white paper and the new drivers within the current sort of market, actually a lot of the sort of players will just sort of shift a little bit but keep their position.
That speaks to one of the handouts you have, which is we tried to create, everybody agrees about the values. Oh, we honor everybody, we value volunteers, we ask people to give back, we build community. They all say those things. So what we did working with a client group was produce what we call a fidelity inventory. And if you look at one of the sheets, it involves an 100-point scale with I believe 20 questions that are very simple questions. You say you value the assets of people. Well, do you ask them what they like to do? This does not take a huge organizational change. You say you value their volunteering. Well, do you record it and do you link it to anything? You say you ask them to give back. Does anything in your documents ask them to give back? And is there anybody they could turn to? So it's a very simple index, and we would love to see actually a review of the performance of organizations and agencies to say, how are you doing now, and why don't you try changing your practice to respond so that you can give a different response and get a higher score on this co-production fidelity index. And that was why we created it as both so that change agents within organizations, but also so that a client group could rate its agency as to whether it's exacting subordination or whether it's in fact asking for partnership.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yes, over here. There's a microphone behind you.
Hello, my name's Ghislaine Boddington from Body Data Space, and it's been very good to listen today, and I think a lot of what you're saying about how to talk about it, the kind of new words, the shifting, the psychology around this kind of area is helping a lot. But I'm working in the arts and culture sector, who have always worked in a way with time banking and with co-production. And if we, what something's nagging in me, and I can't maybe quite put it into question, but a kind of slightly deeper fear that at the moment, all that's done for arts and culture is mean that we've been cut. And the fact is, at the moment, as everyone will know, there's just been recent cuts, quite large cuts. And the push from our public sector funders is towards more volunteerism and towards commercialisation, but with much, much less public funds coming in the middle. And I was just wondering what other people felt about that slight nagging fear in me, that actually it's just an excuse for the public funders to stop more monies coming in.
I think that part of what has happened is that the very things that I'm saying are devalued in the arts and humanities even more readily. If we began, and nothing, you produce an outcome, but people have no idea either of the labor or the artistry or the genius that goes into it. I've got to say that unless that's given numbers as part of, so that it becomes perceived to be part of what I'll call a larger GDP, a GDP based on well-being, not on how many prisons and nursing homes we build. I mean, the hero of the GDP is the terminal cancer patient undergoing chemotherapy and a divorce simultaneously. That's our notion of growth, right? That's how we measure growth. You're trying to promote a different measure of growth with a different set of activities and a different set of contributions. And I hate to say that commoditizing it in this way might at least give you some ammunition, but I think we need to find new ways to value that contribution and to value what comes from it. And if this is useful, great, and if it gets in the way, forget it.
Thank you. Did you have a point you wanted to make? Thanks, Philippe.
I'm Philippe from Russia Green Time Bank. I'm not specifically responding to your question, but just a few thoughts that I've had about time banking. And just looking at the co-production 2 paper that Edgar Cahn mentioned. And I think for me, there is an issue is that we talk about, often when we talk about time banking, or the voluntary sector, we have all sorts of words like volunteers, staff, service users, members, I've got here clients, and all these words actually they mean different things to different people. My daughter says to me, she said to me, I don't want to be a volunteer, because she says she finds it very patronizing. To her, it means that she's lesser than the manager of the volunteers. She says, I just want to be part of this. And when you talk to the members of Russia Green Time Bank and Paxton Green Time Bank, where we are very similar in what we do, what people say is that it's a family and it's belonging. And so if you start to, in my view, if you want to change public services, if you want to change society, if you want to transform the world, you have to see it in the sense of people feeling valued, people feeling that they belong, that they can contribute, they can co-design. But you have to take all these words that make them feel perhaps lesser than or used or a commodity. And I think this is where there's going to be a problem with the cuts and the using volunteers to replace services and so on, because it just doesn't have that same power of people saying, I belong to this family and I feel really valued and wanted and I'm also growing as a person. My experience of working in the voluntary sector is that sometimes volunteers join in, they register as a volunteer. So they register because they are good at bookkeeping or some other skill. So that's it. This is a volunteer bookkeeper. And then the volunteer center will find them placements to be the bookkeeper. And they'll be bookkeeper in different organizations. In a time bank, when you join a time bank, most people in my time bank, they start with nothing. A lot of them feel they haven't got anything to contribute. But actually, as they get involved, they start to pick up all sorts of skills. They're not just a bookkeeper. There are all sorts of skills coming up because they've been so valued and so included, and they've had a wide range of experiences, exchanges, and learning opportunities. So actually, their self-esteem starts to rise, and their self-confidence starts to rise. And so they're not interested in those words. They just want to be part of his family and the sense of belonging. And I think to me, that's a key part. Now, in terms of where you are at with your organization, if you want to use time banking, I think that's how you've got to look at it. Is that how can I change my organization in such a way that the people that we're dealing with have that sense of value, that sense of belonging. So actually, they will get involved. They will be there. They will love it. And that's the key. Okay.
Thank you, Philippe. Edgar, Sam, did you want to comment on those?
I think we stopped dreaming and we started settling for incremental changes, even though what brought us into the fields that we did, and when I looked at the list of people here, the organizations, we joined them because we really wanted to make a difference in the world. We wanted to make a change. I think we have to step out of how do we just save what we've got and how do we go for broke to fulfill our dreams. Because the human capacity is there. We are limited by something called money. Isn't that weird that that thing stands between us and our dreams when we can create a medium of exchange that can enlist everybody and we can begin to start dreaming again. And I think it's time we step back and just said, we can make a difference, and if this economy teaches us anything, it ought to teach us that money should not limit what's possible in terms of social justice and in terms of asking really the only questions that I find myself asking, which is why am I here and what kind of a world do I want to try and leave behind? And if we stick with those questions, I think we'll say, no, it's not just to put one foot in front of the other. It's to dream and to reach and to reach and to dream again. And that's what you were speaking to with, with the folks who go into probation. They went in to dream. They went in to make a difference. We've lost that. We need to recapture that.
Thank you. Shall we take some final questions? Yes. There's a microphone just coming your way.
One of the things that you said when you started was you made the analogy between changing the operating system and not just the program or having a patch on it. And what I'm hearing is like two kind of different interpretations of time banking or this concept. And one is what you've just been saying, which is that actually we can create a different society that holds kind of idealized values of extended families or, small villages or tribes, like where everyone looked after each other and everyone cared and everyone had to put in because we relied on each other. And the other is that actually we can subsidize the lack of finances, like money, by using labour and giving it value. But if we use that approach, don't we then run the risk of actually the power stays in the system stays the same, because the only thing that we are then participating in is subsidising the existing system. We can't set up our own co-housing or, unless the government says, yes, we will give you the land to do that, or because we don't have the resources, because we still need the money. Do you see what I mean? Like, this is not replacing the money system. And I suppose, I don't know how to put that as a question, but how do we replace the money system with mutual aid, I suppose.
I mean, I'm not offering an alternative to the money system. But I think just from my experience really of joining an organisation that had no money, joining an organisation 7 years ago that was trying really hard, but it just had no money or resources, and it actually forgotten. It almost forgotten that the resources that it had was its people. Now, I couldn't wave a magic wand and come up with the funding, but what we could start to do was scratch away at that insidious notion, really, that people are somehow incredibly limited. So once we began to let the genie out of the bottle, in terms of actually including people, and I think we've become a profession that almost feels as though it needs to protect people from some of the problems too. I think we guard a lot of information with the best intentions, but actually there's this sense that whether we work with people or vulnerable groups, or that only some people can hold all the information. And what I learned very, very quickly is the more that you involve people in the problems, the quicker the solutions come. So I don't want to be sort of airy-fairy or offer simplistic solutions, but we learned very, very quickly that money was just one part of the piece. And if this sounds like a cliche, I don't really make that many apologies. In that, again, we learn very, very quickly to go where the energy is, because I think you can exhaust yourself by bashing away a process or a thought or a decision maker, and whilst you're always knocking at their door, there's a transaction that takes place. What we learned through focusing on ourselves, doing the best job, corny stuff, doing the best job we could, unleashing the potential within the client group. Within 2 or 3 years, people started to knock at our door. And I think it's in the confidence somehow, and again, from our point of view, we would like to be an organisation that can encourage you and work with you to sort of build that level of confidence to actually take the chance, because within a very, very short space of time, the talents and the energies and the enthusiasm that this way of working can unlock is quite incredible, really.
I think that you're raising almost a two-level question. One is, what's the transformative message that will get people out of passivity? Because the message that the medium and the government and the systems deliver is that nothing you do matters, that you are simply, or you can hope that there'll be changes in the economy, you can hope that there'll be changes in government, but that you don't matter, and we see that in voting, we see that in civic participation. And so part of what time banking is about a lesson that every hour you give, it's a very incremental message that says each hour matters, each hour counts. And so part of it is a messaging and a sort of deprogramming of the message that says you're basically impotent and deficient, and if you just would buy this toothpaste and have white teeth and have your hair look in a certain way and wear certain clothes, you might be okay. And that's sort of the message so we've got a deprogramming job, but then there's a strategic issue. The strategic issue is, if you want to shape something, there are 3 different ways in which we've seen time banking take effect. One is, in an organization, it changes the way that whole organization operates. The second is to create an outside peer organization that is not threatening, like a homecomers academy, like a youth court, that complements and then gradually pushes back the domain of the existing system. And that's outside, but that's the kind of thing that foundations and the government like to invest in. The third is I'll call dialectic, which is the hell raising. We need some hell raising around how human service professionals are trained and programmed so that they don't ever know how to ask for help. They know how to say, can I give you help? We need to look at the way in which we need a critique of the way in which money gets spent and what it produces. So there's a dialectic method, there's an external partnering method, and then there's an internal pervasive method, and different strategies work in different contexts, depending upon where you are.
Great, thank you. And then one last question we still got. Otherwise, I've got a question I want to ask. Okay, I'll ask my question then. So now I think we're closing the end now, and in your summing up, I guess. But I had two thoughts really. One was around, given that there's some really good existing and emerging practice and things happening out there, how can we really effectively support scale and continued learning and evolution? And the second question was really about, which sounds flippant, but isn't intended to be flippant, of what would your advice be, or your top tips to be a really good troublemaker or a really good hellraiser?
Well, on the issue of scale, you need to enlist widespread creative energy. And I hate to be crudely pragmatic, but the amount of creative energy in this world, and I say my world too, that goes into creative proposal writing is such, I'm being blunt, but that a small group of grants of 20 to 50,000, even if you gave 10, 100 organizations would immediately start thinking of creating ideas, and you would unleash incredible creativity. And if you could just begin to acknowledge that, you would get a storm of people thinking about a different way of doing things, and it would be a catalyst. If that were linked to citizen engagement, if that were linked to the production of citizen engagement hours of some sort, then that's the fastest way I know to get any idea to scale, short of the government announcing this is going to be a new public policy. So that the other thing is we do need the stories collected in the way that Martin has collected, and we do need that on YouTube, and we do need all of you have stories. And the truth, the moving truth, is in those stories. And we now have social network media that can begin to, we need to send out a different message of what's possible. And I think taking it to scale means making those stories come alive, because we only remember our failures, but our successes evaporate, and they're transient. And unless we capture them and preserve them as special and as triumphs, all we remember is what we didn't do or where we failed. I would say, I will just tell you my latest venture in troublemaking, because there are two things that we waste. One is time, and you've heard me on time before. But the other is something called knowledge. I was asked by the head of one major foundation, what could we do about the racial disparity that we see pervading the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the education system, in terms of who is excluded or who is put in prison and so forth, or who is detained. And the law in our society says that you cannot attack that disparity unless you can prove it is intentional. And for 30 years, people have tried to prove it's intentional statistically and so forth, and by looking at people's patterns and conducts with failure. I looked at that and I said, I know how to prove intent. You prove intent not by looking at the past, but by giving people a choice about the future between present practice and alternatives that work, alternatives that work and are cheaper. And if they reject alternatives that work and are cheaper, then they're going back to business as usual is no longer a neutral act. It becomes an intentional act to perpetuate disparity. Well, I think that we need to, and so I've gotten legislatures to hold public notice hearings to put the whole juvenile justice system on notice of alternatives to detention that would be cheaper and that work, and then say, if they keep doing what they've been doing, we'll meet them in another forum called a court with a civil rights action. So that's my latest troublemaking. I think that we have not created an obligation to use knowledge and use innovation that works. And that what we need to do as troublemakers is to say, if we can find things that work, we need to celebrate them, and we need to create an obligation on the part of people either to use that knowledge or to come up with something even better. So that would be my strategy for future troublemaking.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And can you join me in thanking Edgar and Sam?